Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. Michigan is expected to be one of the most closely watched states in this fall's midterms. Democrats see it as a key piece to flipping control of the Senate. In last night's primaries, progressive Democrat Abdul El-Sayed narrowly won the nomination over Haley Stevens, who had the backing of centrist Democrats, and will face off against Trump-endorsed Mike Rogers for a Senate seat. We talk more about the race with Matthew Handley. Matthew Handley is the host of Michigan Morning Saturday on Ave Maria Radio at 8 a.m. He's also the news anchor on Morning Offering and the editor of purplecatholic.com. Matthew, thank you for joining us. How are you?
Hi, Marcus. It's good to talk to you. Thanks for having me on.
I'm very glad to speak with you. So let's begin by recapping what this race has looked like and what the core differences are between the positions of El-Sayed versus Haley Stevens.
Yeah, so this has been a relatively nasty race, especially since Mallory McMorrow dropped out. The last 2 weeks have had a couple debates between both El-Sayed and Stevens, and both have really took to some personal attacks during that time, although it was interesting to see last night during some of their speeches, they were a little more conciliatory about wanting to beat Mike Rogers and have that be their new go-forward talking point. And when it comes to positions, El-Sayed, well, he claims he's not a democratic socialist, but he is certainly democratic socialist adjacent. He's been campaigning with members of the Democratic Socialists, and many of his policies would fall into that category as well. Talking about Medicare for all. One issue I know that a lot of people were taking issue with is that he wanted to block all weapons and military sales to Israel, not just condition them, but completely block them. And not have that anymore from the United States. Haley Stevens, on the other hand, she is the definition establishment candidate. She had worked for the Michigan Republican Party, then on the Clinton and Obama campaigns, and then later in the Obama White House, been a congresswoman for a number of years. Her policies were the more typical Democratic policies you'd expect, pro-abortion, expanding certain welfare programs, not necessarily going all the way for Medicare for all, but certainly expanding access to Medicare and Medicaid and policies like that. And what we saw last night was a clear decision by Michigan Democrats to go in a direction that was not the establishment way. And we can talk more about that and about the locations where we saw that, but it's interesting to see them attempt to unify last night during their speeches, even though the race wasn't called until very early this morning, and then, well, depending on the outlet, early this morning or later in the day here the day after primary day.
El-Sayed's positions and policy opinions, they reflect a particular development in the Democratic Party. Could you please shed more light on that?
Yeah, so we're seeing a rise of real progressivism in the Democratic Party, and you see that with these endorsements from Senator Bernie Sanders, from Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and they're really taking strategies out of the Trump 2016 playbook. They're looking at things going on in Washington and saying, look, the Democratic establishment has not worked for you. We need to change that. It's broken. We need to do this our way now and get away from that establishment. Of course, we've talked about, and I know you've talked about before, some of the problems that come along with this. Obviously, I've got my issues with Medicare for all. We typically, when these candidates come in, we see some strange social decisions as well. Men and women's sports. We've lost the gay marriage argument here in the United States, but we see that getting expanded into other areas as well, including going after Catholic adoption centers and Catholic social services. But that's been the real push. The real push, given that the establishment's not working anymore. And I think the Bernie Sanders folks, even though Sanders had done quite well in 2016, it looks like that their time is now coming, in part because of frustration among people who are just think the establishment's not going to working. And it's the same thing that we saw with Republicans in 2016.
So it's clear that El-Sayed is running on an anti-establishment Democratic platform. How is that going to impact the bipartisan race in Michigan, given that both parties are seeing Michigan as a territory up for grabs?
Yeah, and this is where it gets interesting because my initial gut reaction to this last night was that this will be a cakewalk for Mike Rogers because El-Sayed, of course, he won overwhelmingly in places like Washtenaw County, Ingham County, Kent County, big college areas. But he lost in his own home county, in Wayne County. Haley Stevens was the victor there. Even though he's from that area, he was the Detroit Health director for a while. He was the Wayne County Health director for a while. But he still lost that county. The other thought I had as I'm looking at this as well is that because you've got Jocelyn Benson now as the gubernatorial candidate, that could give him a real leg up. She overwhelmingly won her primary last night against Genesee County Sheriff Chris Swanson. And she's got a lot of real name recognition, and we saw Democrats really coalesce around her to push her to the gubernatorial nomination. And because of that, that may give El-Sayed the lift that he needs to get above Mike Rogers, because you'll get people turning out not necessarily to vote against Mike Rogers, but to vote against John James, so they can keep Democrats in power in Lansing. And so that may give him the boost that he needs to win. But otherwise, if it was another candidate at the gubernatorial race, I don't think El-Sayed would necessarily have a shot. But I think it's still a long shot, but I think he's got a better shot with Jocelyn Benson there as the governor's nominee.
Which becomes a kind of cause for concern for all the Catholics living in Michigan, too.
Mm-hmm.
But what this also demonstrates, based on what you said earlier, is that the progressivist wing, an anti-establishment wing within the Democratic Party, doesn't seem to be static. If anything, it appears that it's increasing in its influence.
Yes, it does. It's not static. It's increasing. And part of it is younger people that are joining in the Democratic Party are going to be more progressive. And that's why you see such victories in like I said, Washtenaw, Ingham, Kent counties, Kalamazoo County, where you got down Western Michigan University, even up here in the Upper Peninsula, where you see the colleges and universities up here. That's where El-Sayed won. And you have a real galvanized group of voters right now. There's another interesting statistic too, and this may also play into what happens in November. Craig Mauger at the Detroit News this morning pointed out that 1.5 million Democrats voted for governor here in Michigan yesterday, or in early voting and absentee voting as well. Only 900,000 Republicans voted. There was clearly not a real galvanizing force to get Republicans out to vote last night, or yesterday rather, even in a party, where we had a contentious gubernatorial race on the Republican side. There were a number of primaries for House seats on the Republican side as well. But there was something really driving Democrats yesterday, and I have no doubt it's the Stevens El-Sayed race, but that really drove out a lot of people. Now, what could happen is it drives out more Republicans here in November, with ones that want to make sure that El-Sayed is not the senator from Michigan, and to perhaps make sure that Jocelyn Benson's not governor of Michigan. We'll have to see how well Mike Rogers and John James can motivate those folks to get out and go vote, especially since Trump's not at the top of the ticket anymore. But that was something I thought that, that's a real interesting problem last night, that if only 900,000 Republicans voted for governor, 1.5 million Democrats did. There's something there in a race, and in that race, that wasn't even contentious there on the Democratic side.
Could you comment on some of the factors and reasons for why the campaigning on the Democrat side was that successful?
Sure. So on the gubernatorial side with Jocelyn Benson, in part it's because she just had overwhelming name recognition, and other people that might have had a shot, such as Lieutenant Governor Garland Gilchrist, they seemed to get the message pretty quickly from the Michigan Democratic Party that they needed to get out of the race. That's why Garland Gilchrist removed his name from consideration, and he decided to join the Secretary of State's race, which, of course, here in Michigan, those are set by the parties. We don't vote in a primary for the Secretary of State or the Attorney General. So by getting all the candidates out of the way to get the preferred candidate in, that really helped. Now, neither Chris Swanson or Jocelyn Benson, I would argue, are as progressive as Abdul El-Sayed. And I think what the Democratic Party was hoping for here in Michigan was that by having Jocelyn Benson be the primary person for the gubernatorial campaign that they would have been able to prop up Haley Stevens in the same way. It'd be interesting to see if you're going to see Benson campaign with El-Sayed to try and get out Democratic support. But partially the reason that Benson was so successful is, one, her name recognition as Secretary of State, whereas Chris Swanson's not really well known outside of Genesee County, but also just because the Democratic Party got that race organized and got the people out that they didn't want in.
To refocus on El-Sayed, can you talk about his coalition and his supporter base? What are the kind of demographics that are very sympathetic or supportive of his positions and policies?
Well, as I mentioned, it's generally younger people. It's people that are frustrated with, as I mentioned previously, the way the Democratic establishment has been acting. It's people that are absolutely opposed to Israel's intervention in Gaza and in Lebanon. Clearly with El-Sayed, he's got a problem with Israel in general by not wanting to have them be able to purchase any sort of weapons from the United States. So it's people that feel disenfranchised. It's people that are frustrated with the system, that don't want to see things continue the way they are. Like I said, it's similar to the Trump situation we had in 2016, where Republicans felt very disenfranchised.
Matthew, you and I could go on for long. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on this.
Of course. Thank you, Marcus.
My guest has been Matthew Handley, host of Michigan Morning Saturday on Ave Maria Radio at 8 a.m., news anchor and morning offering and editor of PurpleCatholic.com. And we've been talking about the Michigan election recap. This is expected to be one of the most closely watched states in this fall's midterms. Stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter.